Hello and welcome to the second lesson for the WordPress plugin development. This lesson is going to be about actions, filters and hooks, very important concepts in WordPress development. Okay, so let's get started. Today's lesson, we are going to create a simple plugin that uses hooks, actions and filters. By the end of this video, you should have an understanding of all the terminology of this topic. This is quite important because when you do further research, this can be the bit that gets confusing. So it is important to understand all the terminology. You'll be able to explain how a hooked function works, and we'll be able to create a couple of plugins using these hooks and these actions and filters. Additionally, the challenge outcome is to use your knowledge that you've gained in this lesson to research new hooks and create new plugins. It will be great to hear which hooks that you used and what plugins you have created in the comments below. Okay, so the first step that we're going to look at is the language and more importantly the overview of how WordPress makes the website. The kind of language that we're going to be focusing on is hooked functions, actions, and filters. Now, here we've got an analogy here, and we need to treat WordPress like a factory. So what we do not do in WordPress is it doesn't just have one file that creates the whole website. What happens is when the process starts, it goes through a series of steps. And then once it completes all these steps, the website is completed and it's published. Each step has a specific purpose. So it could be the head of the website, it could be the body, it could be the comments. There are many different steps to creating the WordPress website. And this is all initialized from those two folders that we talked about last week, the admin and the include. Now, when we create a plugin, what we do is we make our own code, and we have to figure out at what step do we want to attach our code to. So we create a little hook, and we find the place in the process that we want to hook our function to. So that step that we want to hook our function, that what we create is a hook there. And then our code that we use, we call that a hooked function. So we can attach that code to one of the steps. Now that code can be either an action or it can be a filter. What an action does is it just implements the code and then goes straight on to the next step. There's no return value. So if you think of step 1, you do your code and then it goes back to step 2. What filter does is it returns a value. So if you think of it as it goes step 1, it implements your filter and then goes back to step 1 to finish that step 1 before going on to step 2. So hopefully you've got a better understanding. We're about to go through some examples to help you consolidate the information. So let's look at our first example of a hooked function. So if we look here, we have our code. So this is the code that we make that we want to change something, our plugin code. And this is our hooked function. So I've got a series of questions here. Before we go through them, I would like you to stop the video and see which ones that you can get, and then we'll go through the answer. So stop the video now and attempt those questions yourself. Okay, so hopefully you've tried to answer some of the questions, so let's go through them together. So is this an action or a filter? Well, if we look at our code, or if we look at our function here, there is no return. So what happens is our hook function calls our code, and then our code gets executed. So there is no return, so it is an action. Where is our code hooked to? Well, if we look here, this is the hook, or this is the place where we're going to hook our code. So we hook it to the footer, or the WP footer. Again, number 3, this section tells us this. Okay, so this section tells us where our hook is, or where we're hooking the code. This section is the function name. So this and this is the same. So it's saying we're going to call this function, and then this is our code for that function. What do you think this code will do? Well, here, this is just some HTML. It's just saying that we're going to create a footer. What color is the text and what color is the background for that footer, and it's just got some comments, it's got some text with a link here. So it's going to create our own personal footer. Now what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be finding out where we can find where the different hooks are. So we're going to go on to the WordPress development website, and we're going to be able to have a quick look at all the different places that we can hook our function to. Okay, so now that we've gone to the developer WordPress website, and this allows us to search the different hooks that we can attach our code onto. So for example, if we look here and we put on the hooks, we can browse through all the hooks that we can attach our code to. So do remember, it tells us if we need a filter or a hook. I'm going to show you a filter example later, but it's important to know what kind of code that you need. Do you need an action or do you need a filter? Okay, so if we search for our WP footer, and we don't want the function one, we want the action hook. So if we look here, we know that we need an action to create this, and it tells us where in the process this will be initiated. So remember that first screen where we said that it's like a factory and it does step by step? Well, it gives us a little bit of information about where in the process this is. So if we look here, it tells us a little bit about the description, and it can give us some examples here. So this is a good website to use to help you find out about more hooks that you can attach your code to. Okay, let's look at our second example for an action. So we have our code here, and then we have our hooked function. So we have some questions here. So what is the key word to attach a hook to a function? If we wanted to add more functionality to our code, what part of the code would we change, and what do you think this code will do? I'm going to give you a hint before I stop the video. Here, this WP get function, if you see this WP, then it's a WordPress function, and you can use the website that we looked at before to search what it means and what it does. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video, and then let's see if you can answer all these questions. Okay, so I hope you've attempted the questions. Let's go through them together. So what is the key word to attach a hook to the function? The key word that I was looking for is the add action. So it has two parameters. The first one is the hook where we're going to attach our code to in the WordPress process. And the second one is the name of our function. So it's the name that we're going to call to execute our code. If we wanted to add more things to our code, we would just add more code here. So we wouldn't change anything here. We would just change more code in our code section, our function. So what do you think this code will do? So this is the tricky one. What I've hoped you've done is I've hoped you've searched three things here. So I've hoped you searched on the website what template redirect means. I've hoped you've searched WP get current user, and I've hoped you searched the W redirect. So let's look and search them now, and so we get a good idea of what they do. Okay, so we're back at the website now. We're going to try and search those three things that I mentioned earlier. So the first one is that template redirect. Here we know it's an action hook, and we know it fires before determining which template to load. So it doesn't tell us that much about it, but the reason why I've attached it here is because when we figure out or find out what our code does, it's important that we do it before the template is loaded, because what we are going to be using in our function is to redirect, is to change the website location so it goes to a different website, which means that we don't need to load the rest of the website. So it is important sometimes that you know the position of the steps in the WordPress process. Okay, so let's look at the second one. So we got the get current user, and we load this one, and this retrieves the current user objects. So we know it's a function here, and that's why we're using it in our code. It retrieves the current user and it returns an object, so it doesn't return a variable, and this will explain that little arrow later on. Okay, so do bear in mind that when you return an object, you can also look up many different variables and attributes that that object has. And let's look at the last one. So the last one is the redirect. And this one, of course, just redirects us to the other page. So now knowing those three things, let's go back and explain what our code does. Okay, so we're attaching our code to the hook template redirect. So remember, this is before the templates are loaded, so it happens before the website starts. And it goes here and it finds out the object of the current user. So it gets us not just one piece of information, but it gets us quite a lot of pieces of information about the current user. Now it's saying that if the user's login name, so if the attribute of that current user object equals test, so if the name of the user equals test, we're going to change or redirect our website to YouTube and then just stop the plugin. So what that does is it just looks at the user, and if the user is named test, it changes our website from our WordPress website to the YouTube website. So if you've got that, well done. I guess the reason why I've done this is so we can show you the difference between a single variable and an object, and how you can look up certain objects' attributes by using this arrow button. Okay, so let's try and make a plugin with an action. So before we start, I would like you to make sure that you've set your debug to true, and that should be in the config file. I want you to make sure that you've created a new plugin folder, you've added your index and your main file, and you've added some basic security code. So remember, this is all from lesson 1. I'm going to stop the video, and hopefully you can spend a couple of minutes just setting it up before we go through it together. Well, hopefully you've now created your plugin folders. So let's quickly have a look to make sure everything's okay. So hopefully your config file, if we go down, your debug setting is now true. So hopefully you have completed that one. If we go into your plugins, hopefully you've created a folder, an example folder that you want. You can call it whatever you want. And you've added 2 files. One's the index PHP file, which just has the silence is golden tag on it, and a second file, which is the main one, which will have the basic information as well as the licensing. So hopefully you've added this, as well as one of the security measures that we learned in the last video. Okay, so now that you've created the plugin that you're going to add the action to, I'm going to talk about the 3 steps. The first step to do this is that we need to make sure that we use the keyword to attach the hook to our the function that we've created. So that keyword is add action. The second one then is to find where you want to hook your code to. So then you need to look up what is the name of that hook that we will use to add our function to. And then the third step is to create the function. So it's as simple as those 3 steps. Let's try it out and let's make a simple footer like we saw in example 1. Okay, so now that we know the 3 steps, let's try and make our footer plugin. So if we open up the main file, step 1 is to add the keyword that attaches our hook with our function. So because we want to make a footer, our hook that we're using is going to be the WP footer, and that just means that our function is going to be called at the very end. And let's call the function that we're going to make just foot maybe. So now that we've done that, we have to add our function. And so our function will have to be the same name as the one that we've called here. So we've created our function here, and now we just need to make the code for it. So because I want to use HTML, I'm going to stop PHP here. So I'm using this question mark to stop PHP, and now I can just write some HTML to do it. So I'll put this in a paragraph tag and say this is my footer, and I'll close it up, and then I will start PHP back again. So it continues with it. So that is a footer plugin. So if we save it now, and now let's see if we can activate it and see if we can see this in our website. Okay, so now that we're back on our WordPress website, if we click on the dashboard and go to plugins, we can activate the plugin that we've just created. Then we can go back to the admin website, and we have created our first plugin that does something. So if we wanted to add more information or look about it, we can then just use HTML. So if we use the style function, and let's change the color of the information to white, and we change the background color to blue, that should now update our plugin and it adds some color to it. So let's save that. So if we go back to our WordPress and we deactivate our plugin and then reactivate it, so let's deactivate it, refresh it, and then reactivate it. Hopefully we should get the new updated footer. So then we have the updated footer at the bottom with some extra color. So let's try the second plugin where we redirect our website if there is a user called test. So let's go back and create a new plugin. Okay, so to make our second plugin, we need to go back to the plugin folder, and we need to create the second folder with our second plugin. Our second plugin should have 2 files, one index.php file and one main file, and this main file should have the same name as our folder. Let's open it up so we can start working. Again, it should have the basic information, the plugin name, the description, the version, and the author, as well as the license. It should also have the security code that we've added. And once we have all that, we can start adding our action. So because it's an action, we need to use the keyword. And then we need to think about the hook that we need to attach our code to. So because we want this code to be called before the website is made, we want to use template redirect. And let's call our function redirect only. Now that we've done that, we need to create our function. So we're going to need to create a function called redirect only. So inside the function, we want to find out what the current user is, or who the current user is. And to do that, we can use the WordPress function that we researched. So that should be WordPress get current user. Okay, this will return an object. It won't return one value, it will return a couple of values. So we want to say if the current user is called test. So again, we're saying the current user, and what we're looking for is we're looking for the information called user login. So that's the information that we want. So we want to say if the current user is called test, we want to redirect it. So again, we're using the WordPress function, and it's just saying it's going to redirect to the YouTube website. And then once that has happened, we want to exit our plugin. So close our plugin down. So again, what we have done is we have created an action. Our action's on this hook. This is our function name. It calls this. This function gets the current user, and it's saying if the current user is called test, we redirect our website to YouTube. So let's save that and see if that works. Okay, so if we go back to our WordPress website and we click on the admin dashboard, but to test this plugin, we need to create a user, because remember, it only gets redirected if we have a user called test. So let's add a test user, and let's just call test@test.com. It will add a password. Let's use a very weak password, and then add a new add a new user. Okay, so now that we've added a new user, we can test our plugin. So if we go to our plugin and we go to the plugin that we created, for me it's lesson 1.2, so let's activate it. So nothing should happen yet, but if I log out and I go to the test one and log in and go to the website, it redirects me to the YouTube channel. Okay, so there we have it. We have a plugin that we've made two plugins for the action. One plugin happens at the very end, so that's the footer, and one plugin happens before the website is loaded, and that's using template redirect. So now we are go on to filter and just compare the differences. Okay, so let's look at a filter example. It's the same structure, so even though they've swapped around, so our hooked function at the top and our functions at the bottom, it doesn't really matter which way you do it, okay, but it's still the same structure. And so instead of saying add action, we've just add filter, and we have two parameters. We have the content, which is our hook, and then content upper, which is our function that we're calling here. So there's a few differences. If we look here, when you're using a filter, something gets passed into the function, and then again, like I said, something needs to be returned. So it doesn't go straight on to the next step. What happens is it goes back to the original hooked step. So we have some questions here. Take a moment to see if you can answer them. So take a couple of seconds and see if you can answer those questions. So hopefully you've given them a go. let's go through together. So what's the difference? Well, I suppose there are three main things that you have to remember. So we have the keyword. So instead of add action, we have add filter. Then it calls the content. So that gets from the hook, we get information. And then we can use that information in our function. And then at the end, we need to return something. So that's probably the biggest thing that we have to remember. We always need to return something in a filter. So why do we need the content? Well, we use the content here, or this can be changed depending on what hook we use, but we use this information to change it in our function to return it to the step. So this goes on to question 3. Here, what we've done is we've just got the content and we've just changed all the content to capital letters. And then we've uploaded it into this variable and we've returned this. So again, we get the information, we transform it in some way, and then we return it. Last thing, again, if you want to find out more about the different kind of filters that we can use, if we go back to that website, we can look at the different kind of filters that are available. So let's try and make this plugin, and so we can see the difference between an action and a filter in terms of a real-life application. Okay, so to make a plugin with a filter, it's very similar to making a plugin with an action. Again, let's create a new folder for a new plugin. This folder should have a PHP file as well as a main file. In our main file, it should still contain all the basic information that you need for the plugin, as well as a license and some security code. Once you have all that, you can also just add your filter to the code. So we need to add filter, and then we need to add the hook. So our hook is going to be the content. So we're going to try and get the content of the WordPress website. And then we need to name our function. So let's call it letter upper, because we want to change all of the letters in our content to uppercase. So we call our function here, and we're going to call it letter upper. Now, one of the differences between the action and a filter is that usually we get some information from the hook. So I'm going to call it content, but you can call it anything you want. So you could call it con or con1, but I'm going to call it content just to help me remember what it is. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to transform that information. So let's create a variable called new content, and then let's convert that content to uppercase using a PHP function. So we have string to upper, and then we put in our content, and what will happen is that content will then be converted all to uppercases and put into new content, and then we can just return new content. And so that will return it to the stage where it loads the content information. So before it loads the content information, it will transform that information to what we want. So let's save this and see if it works. Okay, so let's see if it works. So we go back to our WordPress website, we click on the dashboard and go to plugins. We find the ones that we've just created, which is, for me, is lesson 2.3 filter, and we activate it. So there's no error message, it says it's activated, and so let's go back. So if we look here, this has been the content. So what's happened is we took the original content, which was lowercase, and we transformed it, so we made it all uppercase, and then we returned it to the WordPress files, and they initialized the website using the new transformed information. So now you've got a good idea of both how action and filters work in WordPress plugins. Okay, so before we finish the video, try answering some of the concept checking questions. So I'm going to stop the video, or hopefully you can stop the video for a couple of seconds and see if you can get all the answers before we go through it together. So hopefully you've stopped the video and now we can look at the answers together. So what is the key word for creating an action? The key word is add action. What is the difference between an action and a filter? Well, a filter returns a value, so you get some information from a filter, you transform that information in some way, and then you return it. With an action, you just do an action and it doesn't need to be returned. There's no value that needs to be returned. What are the steps that you need to create an action? Step 1, you need to add the keyword and then attach the hook to the function. Do you remember, in an action it's called add action, in a filter it's called add filter. 2, add the hook that you want as well as the function that you will create. And step 3, create the function. Number 4, hopefully that you've gone onto that website and you've told me what the hook is. So remember, this is not a hook that we've used in the video. This is a hook that you should have gone and done some of your own research. So to get a filter, to use a filter to change some of the comment content, where we're looking for the hook comment text. And if you used that filter, you could do all sorts of things. So try and maybe get rid of spam, or trying to get rid of rude words in your comment section. You can do all sorts with this. Okay, so that's all we have done, or that's all the time we have. Thank you very much. So today we've created a simple plugin with actions and filters. We've done that by understanding what these concepts are. We've done it by practicing and writing our own actions and filters. And we've done it by knowing how to research more hooks. So if you have any feedback that you would like to give, if you would like more examples of actions and filters, let me know. If you think there is an area that we haven't really covered well in the video, let me know. And if you think of any other ways that I can improve these videos, just leave me a message in the comments section. Thank you very much and goodbye.